Hey everybody, welcome to my Suburban Oasis. So today I am going to be taking you around the yard to show you a little bit about how you can keep your flowers blooming longer by using deadheading and pruning at the right time. So let's just walk through the garden, and I'm going to have a pair of secateurs and a cart right here to put my stuff in, and we're gonna see what we can find, and I'll show you how it's done. If you're enjoying my channel, please subscribe, give me a thumbs up on this video, and even hit that notification bell to get notified of a new video. Alright, I'm gonna grab my secateurs and then let's get going. Okay, so these foxgloves are biennials, which means that I grew them on from seed last year, and then this year they are going to put out blooms. And so they've already put out most of their blooms. As you can see, some of the stalks are drying up. I do believe that many of them are going to put out some additional blooms, but in order to do that, I need to cut them back. So let's take a closer look at what we need to do here. Now, if I wanted to just let these go to seed, I could do that, but it's early in the summer right now, so I don't want to do that, because if I do, I will get less flowers. So I'm actually going to take this back to right here, and what I want to show you is there are some tiny blooms that are going to be on either side of this that are going to start coming up. So I'm just clipping off some of the dead. So I'm going to go around and do that with some of the other ones, and we'll take care of this garden. It's going to make for a little bit cleaner of a look in this garden bed as we get rid of some of these, which it's called deadheading because they're dead heads. And you can see this one might keep flowering, but it was so dry that I think it's pretty much done. I don't think it's going to get any further, so we're going to keep on cutting. Now, if you're not sure where it's going to rebloom, it's okay. You can cut it back further. There's usually going to be some blooms that will pop up on either side where you cut it back. It might take a little bit longer if you cut it back further than the spot where they're already ready. But like this one, it's almost done blooming, so I'm going to just cut it way back. And I'll leave this one because most of the bloom is still there, as is this one, and I can tell that these blooms are still very viable and will continue blooming. So foxglove blooms from the bottom up, so you can watch it go through different phases of bloom and cut it at the time that's right. Again, these had some blooms on there, but they're looking so ratty right now. I'd rather have the plant put some more energy into its roots and be able to develop some new shoots for more blooms. Now again, because foxgloves are biennials, I do like to make sure that some of them get seeded every year. So once the season gets a little later, I will actually let them dry off and go to seed. That way they will self-sow, hopefully. And then while I'm in here, I'm looking for any leaves that don't look very healthy, and I'm just going to trim those off as well as I go. Oftentimes they're around the base or in the middle, where maybe they've gotten too much water or not enough sun. Now these are not the kind of plant that you would want to cut all the way back down to the ground, okay? So I know I've showed you that with some other plants before if you watch my channel, but this is not one of the plants you want to do that with. So this geranium here, I believe this is a Roseanne geranium, and it blooms prolifically, and it will continue to bloom throughout the season and just continue to grow out. But it's actually invading the space where we keep one of our chaise lounges. So I'm going to come in here and I'm going to trim it back. And this requires some significant pruning. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go for these very thick stems, because those are the ones that have put on the most growth and the most blooms. And it might seem a little crazy to cut things back this hard, but the other options can leave it looking a little bit wonky. So this is how I like to do it in this particular area of my yard. And you'll see the blooms just get all stuck up on each other and everything. These plants can get massive. I've had these in my yard for a while, and while I really love the color of them, I'm not a fan of how much work they actually are in terms of the cutting back. If I had a space that was like 12 by 12, I could just let them go, but I don't have that. And I'm not going to save that much room for this plant, because while I love it, I enjoy growing lots of different kinds of plants. Alright, so this is going to look really severe, so if you don't like watching plants get pruned, close your eyes. But this is where I'm going to town now. I'm just going to grab a whole big clump of them like this, because there's so much, you guys, and it's all getting caught up on itself. There's no way that I can not prune this hard. Now I'm going to leave the little bits of leaves that are coming up in the center, because they will flush back out again. But you're going to see this is going to look really barren. And again, this is behind a chair, so no big deal. But I also don't want to have it creeping up on people when they're trying to sit down. I probably will eventually replace this plant with something that grows a little smaller. These hardy geraniums are really tough though. And I do love the idea of them growing up through some things. That would look really pretty. I've seen other people do that. Like if you have a bush, or you have some plants that grow like as a spire, so that they're kind of shooting up at you, up to the sky, like as a tower type shape. I'm having a hard time describing it, but if you have upright plants that will come up between the spreading of this perennial, it looks really beautiful. I just find all of this growth to be, again, a little bit too much work, because I might even have to prune this back. Most of the time I don't, but I might have to prune it back like this even a second time this summer. But you can see how long this branch already is. Okay, so here we have a dusky violet penstemon. And I love this plant. I love how much it blooms, but it does get some spent flower heads. So I'm going to show you how I cut these back. These I take a different approach to. You can see that the flower heads have been pollinated and they're going to go to seed. Now again, I could leave those on there and let the birds and the bees and the wind blow those seeds around, but I'm going to pass on that. And what I'm going to do is cut them back right above 2 sets of leaves, just like that. And I'm going to go through this whole plant and do that with all of the leaves, or excuse me, all of the shoots that are spent
And one thing I'm going to also try to do as I do that, you'll see, is I'm going to try to do them at a little bit different heights. Now, why am I doing that? Because it just looks a little bit more natural. Because for a few days you will see either white as it heals and turns a little bit brown on top, and then I'll start to get additional blooms coming back from these as well. So you can see some plants I take a lot more time with, maybe because they're front and center and so people see them more, or because of the way their bloom pattern works, or how prolific their growth is. Now you can actually see on this one right here that's a little bit more mature, you can actually see that there are some shoots that are already trying to come out, so it's a very natural spot to clip that. This side of the plant still has more blooms left, so I'm not going to get all the way into here. I just have a little bit more to do on this side, and then I'm going to leave the rest probably for at least another few days. Deadheading is essential to the garden maintenance work if you're looking to ensure that you get the longest bloom possible out of your flowers. Many perennials will rebloom if you deadhead correctly. I just have one more in here that I might want to get out here. This one. And this one. Okay. So if you step back and take a look at what this looks like, you can see half of the plant is pruned and the other half is not. But as these bloom out, then I'll cut these back. So these will start to bloom again sooner than this batch over here because of the bloom cycle. And so that's going to be great. Okay, so here we have a heuchera. And some people like to see these bloom and some people don't. I personally like to see some of them bloom. This one is not in an area that I can really see, and I just like to show people how to deadhead these, because you can cut them back before they bloom and put that energy back into the roots in the plant, or you can cut them back after they bloom, whatever you prefer. So I'm just cutting these all the way back down to the bottom. You can see this plant looks really full, but I've already cut back several of the flowers that it has put out. But you can't tell because when I clipped them, I'm clipping way far down and it's below where the plant is. So now, as I fluff it back up, you cannot see that I have come in and done that pruning job. Okay, so I have a lot of salvia in my yard, and there's several different methods that I use to prune them or deadhead them, and it really depends on where they are, how far along they are in their growth process, like their maturity, whether they are a really established plant or if they're new this season or maybe even last. So this one I planted last year. I have a lot of fully established ones that are more mature, and I will actually cut those all the way back down to the ground. And the reason for that is I like the nice fresh mound of foliage that grows back in along with the blooms. On this one though, because it's new, I want to actually be a little bit more dainty about it. So I'm going to cut this one back more like the penstemon. So take a look right here. similar to the penstemon, you'll see a nice new bud that's forming right there. So I'm going to take this spent bloom and I'm going to cut right back to the base of that. And I'm going to do the same thing with this one here, which you can see has some new shoots coming on either side. And then the same thing with these. And why am I doing this like this? Well, it's keeping enough of the foliage around so that foliage, somebody corrected me, I'm lazy when I say that, but it's keeping enough of the foliage around so that it can get proper photosynthesis and help send all of that sun energy back into the roots and the plants, the new shoots, and the new flowers. So we can see one that's already starting here, one here, and another one that's right down in here. There's also multiple ways to deadhead dianthus. So when they look like this, it's a little bit more tricky if you want to keep the blooms that you already have. And I do like to do that, especially since this is a freshly planted flower this year. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to look for the flowers that are spent. They have already died, and I'm going to cut them back. Now this one right here is on a stem that is completely spent. There's nothing else there. So what I'm going to do with this one is I'm going to cut it, hopefully I can show you here. I'm going to cut it right back down almost to the base, just above, again, 2 leaves. Now a little bit trickier are some of these where you may see a bloom still coming. So this one, for example, right here is a stalk that has a dried out flower bud. It has a spent flower and it has a brand new bud happening there. So what I'm going to do is I can trim off this one, I can pop this one off, and then that one is still left to go ahead and bloom. So we're going to go through and do that again. This one right here has all spent or dried flower bloom, so I'm going to trim this one back. Now, when I look at this flower stem, you can see it has a nice new shoot. Look at that fresh blue growth right there. So I'm going to make sure that I don't go back any further than that, because that is going to shoot out a whole new stem and put out a new bloom. So let's just do this whole plant. I'll do it a little quicker now. And you can see how I do different stems differently depending on where they are. And what they have going on. This one's another good example of one that has a nice new shoot on it right here, so I'm going to cut right behind that shoot. And this one, all of the flowers up here are no good, but down below I actually have 2 nice buds that are getting ready to bloom, so we want to leave those on. We'll just trim off the top. So hopefully you get a good sense of how I decide what to cut and what not to cut. Now, again, you don't have to do any of this deadheading. It's not absolutely necessary, but it is important if you want to get the longest bloom life out of your plants. So sometimes when I walk through the garden, I will just pinch things off using my fingers if I see something that needs deadheading, and that's a really good tactic to use when you're in the garden, just taking care of something when you see it. So now if you take a look at this plant in comparison to the one behind it, you can see how much cleaner and nicer that looks, because this one still has a bunch of deadheading to do. And once I clean that one up, it can look just as nice and fresh as the one in front of it. All right, let's go take a look at one other plant. So this is another dianthus, and the reason why I wanted to show you one more of these before we move on to the next plant is because this one I'm going to use a different method for. And so the reason why is because there's so many more spent blooms on this one that it's literally all in one area, and they're very small, so it'd be very difficult for me to come in and do one at a time. It would take a really long time. I have like 6 or 7 of these plants. So I'm just going to show you what I'm going to do, and hopefully it'll work, because sometimes my clippers don't work as well. I like to actually sometimes come through these and use the, what do you call them? They're hand shears, basically. They're like for trimming bushes, and it makes really fast work because the cutting edge of those is about 12 inches long. And I think you get the idea. I think I need to do some adjustment on these clippers, but I think you get the idea, right? So I'm cutting back until all of the spent blooms are off. So I'm not going to do this whole one, but I just want to show you how I'm doing it. And again, it only takes like, I don't know, 5 seconds to do. If I do it this way, I might be able to do it. It cuts much better if I cut things that are a little bit thicker. This really will rejuvenate the plant. Alright, so you can now see that I've gotten pretty much all of the spent blooms off. Yes, I took off some blooms that were still blooming, but not many. And I now have a really nice, clean, fresh mound of foliage that's going to push out some new blooms for me soon. Looks good, doesn't it? Okay, so I thought I would also show you a hosta, because hostas a lot of people have, and some people like to see the blooms on them and other people don't. It kind of reminds me of heucheras, where, you know, people primarily grow them for foliage, but they actually also put out some blooms. And some of them have really nice smelling blooms, and some of them have beautiful trumpet-shaped flowers on them. So a nice example of that is this one right over here. This one has very beautiful blooms on it. So I will not be trimming those off. I love the flowers on that one. I will let those flower and then I will trim them back. These, however, they're kind of a light lavender. They're not easy to see, and I think they make things look slightly messy. So I prefer to trim them back. So in order to do that, I cut them all the way back in. This is similar, again, to how you would trim the heuchera. I'm going to take this and cut it all the way down at the bottom, and that way no one knows the wiser that I have cut anything. Okay, and you know, it doesn't have to be perfect, but I like it because it just helps keep things neat. And so I'll come through here and get down in there. And so again, if you are deadheading to get repeat blooms, you're often doing that on those flowers that are primarily grown for their flowers. But other times I just deadhead things to keep them looking clean, like the hostas and the heucheras, or to put some of the energy again back down into the roots. Well, I hope you enjoyed my video today on deadheading and pruning back. I hope that it helps give you ideas and tips for being able to get out in your garden and keep things blooming longer and keep them looking lush and full as long as you want them to. I hope that you guys are enjoying my channel, and I certainly enjoy making these videos with you. We'll see you next time. Bye!